thanks for joining us for another episode of Mid-American Gardener. I'm your host, Tanisha Spain, and joining me in the studio today are two of our panelists who you'll definitely recognize from being on the show a time or two. We've got Sarah and Jen here. So before we get into all the cool stuff that they brought to show you and to talk about, let's have them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about what they do. So Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah Vogel. I'm a horticulture educator for Illinois Extension. I serve DeWitt, Macon, and Piatt counties, and I'm glad to be here today.
Excellent. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Nelson. I am a horticulturalist. I work as an instructor for the Department of Crop Sciences at U of I, and just love talking about plants any chance I can get.
Yes, and as you can see, she picked up some new ones for you today to discuss. All right, so let's start with you, Sarah. I love the pictures that you sent in. Let's talk about tree health. We're finding ourselves outside. It's getting a little sunnier, a little warmer. Now, before you explain, is it time to start looking at our trees for damage, for, just kind of seeing how they fared over the winter?
Yes, yeah, it's always time for that.
Always time for that.
And, with spring already here and summer's kind of right around the corner, it's really important to kind of take notice of what's going on with our trees. Some of the defects that can happen might lead to, some of those storms that happen in spring and summer can wreak havoc on our trees. So taking notice of what defects they already have might mitigate some of that risk of having a hazard in our yard.
Was there anything during this particular winter that we had that would have caused more damage or stressed trees? What should we be looking for on our properties?
So, yeah, there were some high winds, especially recently. I didn't have an incredible amount of snow, snow load or stress on limbs. But those high winds really can be, and of course frost cracking is another thing that can happen over the winter, where our bark splits from expansion inside. But some of the things that we want to look for are damage to the roots. So you kind of want to, when you're out in your yard, take your mind off of your focus off of your flower garden for a little while and turn around and look at the trees that are providing you shade. You want to look up into the canopy and the stem. Look for things like, big dead branches, especially if they're hanging. That can be really dangerous. Okay. You want to look for any cracks or splits. You want to look down at the roots. And as the first picture I brought shows, this has got just the whole cornucopia of root issues going on. We've got very shallow roots. It's a red maple, so they're notorious for being shallow rooted. We've got some exposed roots. You can see they've taken on some damage. And then up around the trunk, you can see that stem girdling root, and those can cause issues because they essentially strangle the vascular system of the tree. And then to pan back out a little bit there, the previous picture, you can see that there's really limited root space. We've got a curb and a street on one side and a sidewalk on the other. So when we think about how large the root system of a tree is, that tree doesn't have a lot of opportunity to uptake moisture or nutrients. So looking for things like this can really help, kind of assess how your tree's doing overall.
So if we see something like this, is there any way that tree could be saved, or I keep wanting to say things like have a good quality of life.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Yeah. You want to keep your trees vigorous and healthy. Yeah. Surprise, surprise. The first thing I'm going to say is keep your plants healthy, right? So for that particular tree, not trying to grow grass around there because our grass is going to compete with the tree for the same moisture and nutrients that are in the soil. So putting a mulch ring around it will not only prevent grass and other weeds from growing, but also, it's going to suppress any weeds. It's going to help the soil retain moisture and add organic matter back to the soil, and keep the line trimmers and mowers away from the stem of the tree, from the trunk of the tree. So that's always helpful. We see a lot of trees with mower disease, we like to call it. And we don't think about it. We think trees are these big, strong elements, which they are, but even damage, again and again in the same place can cause a big problem over time.
Okay, excellent. Did you want to go into some more damage? You want to come back?
Sure, I'll I'll keep talking about
Okay.
trees if that's what you're asking.
Let's go
Absolutely.
into the second picture that you sent in.
So another defect that you might want to look for are cracks or splits in your tree. So this tree, this hackberry tree, is already split apart, but you can see there were two codominant stems growing together there, and then it had some decay inside. And whether it was high winds or a snow load or just, you know, just what happened that day, that tree actually did split, and you can see a good amount of decay in there. So codominant stems are something that we want to try and look for when trees are young. Essentially, it's two stems that kind of grow together, and as those stems get larger in diameter, they grow into each other, and they get what's called included bark inside. And that essentially serves as a wedge to kind of split those stems apart, as we can see what happened here.
So with this one, what would you do? Would you go into the one on the left? Or is there a way to separate them? What would you do in this instance?
Well, considering that the heartwood is decayed, so there's no, you know, really wood inside, and it's already split like that. If this were in the back corner of the yard or in a wooded area of your yard, it's not really a hazard because there's no target. There's no potential target. But if it were close to your home or garage or children's play equipment, anything like that, then I would take immediate action, call your arborist or tree removal service.
So you would take the whole thing out?
Yeah, you know, because those are the two main stems of the tree. Taking one off is not really going to make it any more healthy. It's just going to continue to probably fail.
Gotcha. Were you going to add something?
No, I was agreeing that we had a similar thing happen at my parents' house years ago. It wasn't decayed like that one, but there were 3 trunks, and one trunk came down in a storm, and my dad was on the phone asking me what he should do, and I was like, I'm 2 hours away, I can't see it. But the arborist was advising with one removed, it's even less stable than it was to start with.
Right. Yeah, they can
I didn't even
become
think of that.
you know, one-sided, weighted on one side. Then you might, if there's anything going on down below, you might experience that lean, which can be indicative of failure too.
Now, is that started from, you know, tiny little saplings being too close, and they just sort of...
Yep.
Really?
And so, I mean, who's to say? There could have been good structure and maybe a branch fell out early on.
Gotcha.
So I don't know that. I'm not intimate with that particular tree.
Gotcha.
But I can say that younger trees, starting them off right to have a nice straight central leader and scaffold branching, you know, evenly spaced, no double branches coming out from the same area. You just want one leader. So probably that happened when it was younger, and it just continued to grow. That was actually in a park, in Allerton Park. So they're not maintaining every tree arboriculturally like we would in our yard.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. What's the next example?
So, you know, I talked about codominant stems. Some tree species are more prone to this upright growth habit that really causes for those codominant stems. As you can see in this picture, this pear tree had 3 stems growing in the same place. And just to reiterate, for lots of other reasons, Callery pear are not great choices, including that they're listed as an invasive species currently, not yet regulated by law. But they have this tendency to form this upright growth and these codominant stems, and they just absolutely peel apart in high winds. I mean, they frequently fail because of things like this. There was also evidence on this tree of probably being planted too deeply. You don't see much of a root flare on the tree. In proper pruning practices, maybe you see a little stub with some epicormic sprouting. That's, you know, an indicator of stress. But this was in a line of Callery pear. 4 out of the 10 had split in that one weather-related event.
Wow.
So yeah, not a great choice for landscape trees.
Now those, you're not the first person on the show that's mentioned those and kind of, you know, saying that they're not great. When did they come into popularity? Do we know how people just got crazy over them?
I'd say like the 80s, 90s.
Probably so. You know?
Yeah, they used to be like the tree because everyone likes the shape of them. They have a really beautiful form, and they flower, and aren't they pretty? But then
the aesthetics
like
got
the 10
us
to
all.
15 years old range is what I've seen. They just like your picture, they fall over.
They fail. Yeah, they absolutely do.
Or they get fire blight.
Yes, yeah, fire blight is another big one. You know, with a lot of our trees that we find in nurseries that are available, there's just a few species that are out there for sale unless you really go looking for it. And so I don't know whether that's change from the consumer side or from the nursery side, you know, growing different things, but lots of neighborhoods could really use some diversification in the tree species. If I see another dead maple in my neighborhood, I'm going to tell you what. But you'll see that in neighborhoods too because they were developed at the same time and all the trees were planted at the same time.
Yes. I was going to ask, is that pear tree a fairly small tree that kind of fits neatly in the landscape? And if so, what are some suggestions maybe of similar size maybe or similar shape that people you know, if they're going through this, that they could pick up?
Yeah, you know, there's lots of native species that are available. Again, you might have to go looking for some, but smaller size trees, you know, I don't know, our dogwoods are still pretty popular. I really like hop hornbeam or even American hornbeam, both of those tree species. Now they do like a little bit of shade where the pear will be full sun. What are some other ones, Jen?
Oh, we have a paperbark maple in our front yard. It's a slow-growing maple. It's a little different than what people are used to seeing because it's got exfoliating bark and has a little different-looking leaf.
Yeah. Okay. So there are replacements out there. There are suitable replacements.
Yeah. And we've got lots of, you know, like native tree checklists for trees and shrubs too.
Okay. We'll have to get the link for that and put it on our website for folks because it's about that time that people are going to be going,
which one do we use? Yeah. And the most important thing if you're thinking about planting a tree is the right tree for the right site. So really take into consideration what those soil and sun conditions are.
Not like that first one that's fighting the curb and the street and just like, I have nowhere to go.
Yeah, those and medians and parking lots, you might as well just call them tree coffins. Because
it's like a giant pot.
It really is.
Truly. Okay. Well, Jen, you went shopping, so
I did.
Tell us what you found.
I am guilty. Yes,
It's for the show.
It's for the show. It's fine. So I've been sort of gradually adding more plants that what I would say are more resilient to neglect, to lower maintenance would be the nicer way to put it. So these are both philodendrons, and I've had really good luck with philodendrons. I just don't have time for fussy plants at my house. So these are both philodendrons that are going to be, there's lots of different forms of philodendrons. Some of them are more viney. This is one that would be more growing just from one central point. It's called Adam.
It's gorgeous.
I'm looking forward to seeing this reach its full potential. It's going to be about a foot tall and wide when it's fully grown. And I bought things smaller. I could buy a great big one and it would be a lot more than what I paid for them. I'm more of a process gardener. I like to watch the things grow and grow into their mature size. It's less expensive, but I'm always about like tinkering with something, seeing how well I can grow it. I'm that way with other things too, so it's not just the product, it's the process. And then this one is Swiss cheese. It's going to have more of a vining nature to it. I've seen this as really nice hanging baskets or maybe put up on a plant stand where it's kind of cascading down. But it's got the fenestrations in the leaves, these holes. These are there's a lot of theories on why plants develop these. Some of it is about whether they can withstand wind or whether they can access sun appropriately if they're an understory plant, which philodendron probably is. So it's going to allow these leaves down below to get some sun through the holes. And then this little tiny one that I got it's Delosperma. It's also known as ice plant, but this one is called pickle plant because each little leaf looks like a tiny prickly pickle. And you might recognize the genus or the common name ice plant because there is a landscape version that's hardy here, and it can be kind of finicky. It's a succulent, so it likes dry soil. So if it gets wet over the winter and stays wet, it tends to rot away. But these will all flower at some point in time. Different. I've seen purple and yellow and white. These are native to South Africa. We forget that all these grow somewhere in the world. They don't just grow at your garden center.
Exactly. And some people regard certain things as weeds.
Yes.
We were in Puerto Rico, and I was just like, I had my face glued to the car window, and I'm looking at all these beautiful plants, and people were just like, no, those are weeds here. And I'm like, How?
Yes.
It's just so lush and beautiful. Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
my students were growing, doing cuttings in the greenhouse, and one that we did was trade scantia. Inch plant or wandering Jew is a common name. And one of my students from Asia said, "Oh, this is what we feed to our goats." She was from a tiny island off of China, and she's like, "Yeah, we feed this to our goats. This is weed."
We don't care about that. That first one, I forgot what its name was.
Adam, they're both philodendrons.
Is that the waxy?
It's got kind of a thicker leaf. It's more of like the tree philodendron type, if you've ever seen those. A friend of mine in grad school had one so big, it took 3 of us to move it in and out of her house for the summer. It just was enormous. I didn't want anything that big. I wanted something with some size to it, but not like needing a cart, a dolly. Yeah, so I'm hoping that this will still have the sort of, you don't have to water it that often over the winter. In the summer, all my stuff goes outside.
Yes.
And goes in the sort of dappled. Same
Yeah,
at your
everybody
house.
gets evicted.
Summer vacation.
Yeah.
Summer vacation.
Go on out and don't bring any bugs in when you come back
or
in
mice,
the fall.
Or
mice.
frogs or
spiders.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, we've got some questions that you guys sent in, so let's get to those. Sarah, we'll start with you. This person wants to know some good shady spot perennials. So what do you have? What do you like for shady spots?
Well, I'm not a native purist, so I like to use some non-natives that don't present a problem. So, we see hostas used so commonly that I would say they're overused maybe sometimes. But if you don't have one, there are some great varieties. Yeah. Some of the tried and true non-natives are, Astilbe, Dicentra, our bleeding heart. We have Japanese painted fern, and Brunnera, which is, I cannot recall the common name for it.
Lungwort? Is that one? No.
I do not remember. I'm sorry, Brunnera. At any rate, it's a good one. It's got really beautiful foliage and small purple flowers on it. And then some of our natives can be really useful in the garden too. If you are a purist, that's okay. Probably better. But we have things like, some of the spring ephemerals. So our bloodroot, our yellow trout lily, Virginia bluebells, which they have a sale even at Allerton Park of some of the bluebells there. And then, I don't know, some of the other wildflowers, golden Alexander is a pretty good one, Ligularia.
Oh, that's a good list. That's a really good list. Do you have any that you would add to that? Any?
The hellebores in my garden look really good this year. So Lenten rose, they're sometimes called.
There are some bluebells peeking up in the yard. I did move some leaves to find them, and my son, bless his heart, he says, "Mom, you told me we weren't supposed to." And I was like, "I know. I just, I wanted to see if they were there." But
Garden police are coming here.
Oh man, I started him too young, and now he knows all the rules. So, okay, well, that's a great list for folks. Jen, we're going to go to you. Would you suggest any miniature citrus trees, such as limes or anything like that? And you have citrus at your house, right?
Yeah, I have.
What do you grow?
The 2 that I've had the best luck with are Meyer lemon and kumquat. Kumquat actually prefers a little cooler temperature and can handle the temperatures in a typical house a little easier than other citrus, and Meyer lemon same way. They both will tend to get scale insects, so you do need to keep an eye out for that. But I've had the kumquats flower and fruit multiple years. I brought some on the show before.
You did.
And that said, that particular tree mysteriously up and died, and I have no idea why. So, I mean, you can be prepared for disappointment with citrus at home, too.
Good note.
Yes,
Good
and know that even these so-called experts kill stuff, too.
That always makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about fussy plants earlier, I can't remember the name of it, obviously, but the one that kind of wilts when you touch it.
Oh,
you had that one.
Sensitive plant.
Is that one still alive?
No.
Right.
That I treated like an annual outside in a pot.
Oh, gotcha.
And that one is a horrible weed in tropical areas. That is another one that people are like, why are you growing that if they're from a warm part of the world?
Meanwhile, we're fascinated.
We're like,
we'll pay
Right.
$20 for it.
Right.
Too funny. Okay. Sarah, we're going to go back to you. Pruning rose bushes. When do you recommend pruning? I live in Illinois.
So it's going to vary a little bit because Illinois is such a long state, of course, whether you're in northern, southern, central. Generally, Roses are a woody plant, so generally the timing is the same. So you late winter, early spring. Lots of people wait for the forsythia to bloom to go out and prune their roses.
Okay.
I personally go a little bit earlier because I have less to do in February than in March.
Makes sense.
And then your method of pruning is going to depend on what kind it is, whether a shrub rose or a hybrid tea or floribunda, any of those.
So some folks might have already done that, and it's okay to do it now if you haven't?
Yeah, you want to catch them before bud break.
Before bud break. Okay. I was going to ask if there was any physical thing that you could look at and go, oh, it's too late, or oh,
Yeah,
that
and
kind of thing.
you're not going, I mean, essentially you can, once they start leafing out, it's not the prime time, but you can still prune them. You're going to lose out on some of the flowers.
Yeah, and that's a bummer.
Yeah, it is a bummer.
Especially when you're growing roses. That's what you're waiting for. This one, I'll go ahead and ask it. It's kind of off season, but Jen, this person wants to know, often the panelists talk about placing plants in garages or basements. It would be helpful for me to know more about the spaces that they're mentioned when we're talking about overwintering. So in garages, is it okay if it's cold in there, if you're doing basements? They just want a little bit more information about the conditions of our overwintering.
Like if I'm overwintering something in my garage, I know it's going to get cold, but it's not going to freeze. My garage is attached. It might be different if you have a detached garage or a shed. So you have to figure that out. You can figure it out with a max min thermometer, or just going out there with any thermometer in the winter and seeing, like you were talking about your greenhouse, even though it was in the 30s outside, it was 60 in your greenhouse. So things like that. In terms of basements and stuff, you want it cool, but it's not going to freeze. And whether it's by a window or not depends on what you're overwintering. Usually you just want things to survive. You're not looking for things to be necessarily thriving and growing.
So is light important when you're overwintering?
I would say it depends on what you're overwintering. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, there's some things that you don't want to get light. You want them to dry out and like completely neglect them.
And be dormant.
Like your bulbs or...
And then when you're ready, exactly. When you're ready to force them out. So yeah, it just, I think, depends on what it is.
Or like I have a rosemary in my garage and it was looking really fabulous. And I thought, finally, that is the plant that I've been trying to overwinter. And it's like I've successfully done it like one time.
They are finicky little devils, aren't they?
Weird. And I thought, this is a mild winter. It's going to be fine. It was looking so good until like 2 weeks ago. And now it looks really sad. And maybe if I prune it back and set it outside at this point, there's some life in it. But the mint in the pot next to it, it's going gangbusters, just fine. It's like throw another winter at me, I'm fine.
I can handle it.
Yes.
So just making sure that they don't get to a freezing temperature,
Right.
wherever
That's really
they
the
are.
critical point for most things that we try to overwinter.
Okay. I hope that answers that question for them. And let's see, passion flower. This one's kind of long. I've had maypop passion flowers growing in my yard for about 10 years. The area where they grow is on the northeast corner of the yard, and there's morning and evening sun and dappled light during the day. The problem is that over the years, there have only been about 2 actual passion fruits that have been produced. Each year, there are many beautiful flowers, but then they fall off and there's no fruit. So that's kind of where their question lies. Where is the fruit?
Well, and I was really intrigued by this question because I've tried to grow passion flower and I had beautiful vines and no flowers. So I guess we always want something more, don't we? But so I started looking at what are her conditions. She's got kind of morning and afternoon and dappled in the middle. What I read is that you need really full sun to get good fruit production on passion flower. And there's a lot of debate depending on the source of how self-fertile they are. Some of them absolutely need another type of passion flower to cross-pollinate, kind of like when we talk about fruit trees and stuff. But supposedly maypop is self-fertile, but what does that actually mean? Some sources said, oh, it's like 2% self-fertile, so 2% of pollinated flowers would actually make a fruit. So I guess it depends on what you count as success.
Gotcha.
And my personal experience has been kind of poor with passion flower, but I'm not stopping. I mean, every once in a while I will find
a learning experience.
Yes, like I'll try again and see if I'll try planting it here or planting it there. But people that have gotten fruits, what I was reading is that they wait until as long as possible, and it starts to look wrinkled and kind of soft on the vine before they pick it. And sometimes it falls off on their own, but you really need to let it fully ripen.
And I can't remember, I think it may have been John, but someone said that they're always fighting the critters for the fruit.
Oh, sure. Because they're watching it just
be
as
there one
close as
day,
we are.
and then they're gone the next day, like no trace
doubt.
of it.
Yeah,
so.
no doubt. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But I would really like to get it, have the luxury of having it coming back in my yard. That sounds really nice.
See? All right, can't win them all.
No.
You know, we're doing our best out here. Okay, any other things you'd like to add? We've got about a minute and a half left. Any tips, anything? Have you guys put in any cool season crops outside or anything?
I bought them.
All right, step one, they are purchased.
I have some 4-packs of broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts waiting to be dealt with at home.
Yeah, all right. They're purchased. We'll take it.
The Brussels sprouts probably won't produce anything till the fall, but I put them in the spring. Have you?
I have not grown them.
I've never gotten any. They don't typically produce well in the spring, but I've planted them in the spring and they haven't done anything till the fall.
Well, you'll have to keep us posted.
We'll
be on Brussels sprout watch.
I'll bring one to show.
Yes, excellent. Okay, well, ladies, thank you so much. We're out of time. It goes so fast. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your time and talents. And thank you so much for watching. And if you've got questions for our panelists, please send them in to us at yourgarden@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook. Just search for Mid-American Gardener. And we'll see you next time. Good night.